Manager of UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub. And on behalf of UGIH team, I would like to welcome you all here in UGIH Pavilion. So we'll start as the theme of the day is cities. So we'll start the first session, which is actually related to cities only. I would request our moderator, Puriya Salehi, who is the head of innovation in ICLAI, to come up on the podium, and the other panelists who are part of this session to take the stage. And I request Puriya to start the session. Puriya.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Really appreciate that. I was wondering if you could increase the volume a little bit. Are we changing? Yeah, because apparently the other one is a little bit dominant. But no, thank you so much. Yes, that's great. Thank you so much, Nathan. We're running a couple of minutes late, so it would be great if our panelists join us, starting with Musamba Thioi, the Executive Officer of UNFCCC Global Innovation Hub, Dr. David Corbett, the Research Officer from our own organization, and Kesha Jihad, the Research and Innovation Manager in South Asia Secretariat. Please join us here, Kesha. We were aiming, like all the sessions that we hold, we were aiming for gender balance. Unfortunately, one of our female panelists fell unwell, and the second one, the governor, is still in transit from the airport because of the delay. Apparently, that's a thing. Yeah, just wanted to acknowledge that gender balance matters for us, but this is the situation now. And we have our colleague, Randy Saad, joining us from Canada. Randy, thank you so much for joining us this time of the day. I understand that it's not a very convenient time, but really appreciate that you join us. And obviously, we're really excited to have you on board. So before diving into the discussion, I would like to share some insights where we stand at the moment. Can we increase the volume a little bit? Because I kind of feel like the other, it's really like intervening with our conversation. Yeah, please increase it a little bit. So we are happy for the other room to enjoy our conversation. So is it? It's not changed. Okay, it's better. Thank you. So I think like we all have heard about like, you know, the trajectories, the emission gaps, what needs to be done, and then changing the narrative from merely focusing on climate into human needs, something that Musamba, as one of the key thought leaders in this space, have been advocating for that in support of their partners. But there's, like when it comes to local level, things are different. At the local level, there are local realities. And local realities means that decision makers need to take decisions that will impact their communities, current generation and future generations. I was reading a report from World Bank that each year, public servants make 500 million decisions that will impact the way we live, the way we communicate, the way we eat, the way we entertain, and so on and so forth. So this is a very important point that, of course, like all these international conversations and policies is important, but at the local level, all these wonderful local leaders, when they go back, they need to deal with the realities on the ground. But here's the challenge. We are living in a world that is changing, and we are dealing with increasing complexities. One day is climate change, the other day pandemic hits, the other day conflict, arms and wars impacts the different countries and different cities. And then the pace of negative impacts of climate change is exacerbating the situations, and then inequalities, and then the digital transformation is also shifting the way we live. So with all of this in mind, we notice that local leaders really find it hard to match past performances with the existing tools. So the governance here is in question, and good governance doesn't really follow the old structure anymore. We really need to revisit the approaches that we take to governance at the local level. But then there's another layer to that, that when it comes to elected officials or decision makers, oftentimes they might not necessarily be experts in terms of, and they might have other types of interest for their political party, for example, and also they are in the office for short term. All of this, plus the fact that even those who are expert, they are benefiting from the type of knowledge that is from decades ago and it's outdated today, puts us at this point that we really need to capacitate our local governments and local leaders with new approaches that they can take to tackle this polycrisis that we are dealing today. So it's not only climate, it's biodiversity, it's water, it's food, and it's poverty, a lot more depending on the context. So dealing with polycrisis through new innovative approaches is something that ICLEI, as the longest established and leading global network of cities, is supporting, and that is our mandate to capacitate our local leadership with all these approaches. However, when you look into the landscape of existing approaches, oftentimes you find either single tools or methods that look into one aspect of governance and fail to respond to other aspects. They may improve one area, but they may actually create new inequalities in some other areas. And again, this puts us in a situation that, like, what can we do to really ensure that our local leaders are capacitated to provide an enabling environment for other actors, civil society, for businesses, startups, incubators, scalers, to come in and play the role that they need to transform their communities. With that, we've been working with a wonderful team in Canada, chief among them Randy Saad and Manuel Rima. Randy is the executive director of Refocus and at the same time the director of Flourishing Enterprise Institute in Wilfrid Laurier University. So he's not really academic, he's from innovation community. That's what I love about him, and he's focused on delivering innovation at the community. There was a model that they revamped it, they applied it in the city of Kitchener during the pandemic, and then later currently working with 5-6 cities in support with ICLEI. And today we have the pleasure of having Randy here to really unpack about this whole systemic management innovation and enterprise evolution, and share some insights how other cities can really benefit from this perspective, and then we'll take it from there. Randy, thanks again for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Poria. It's an honor to be joining the group. I'm sad that I can't be there in person, but thrilled that I'm able to participate. I guess off the top, a big thank you to the UNFCCC and to ICLEI, your colleagues, Poria and yourself, for your leadership on this topic and this stream of innovation that's very necessary. I guess I'll dive right into my presentation and talk. Allow me to share my screen. Hopefully that's visible to everyone. Did that come up okay? Looks like it did. Excellent. So where we begin, the evolving purpose of local government. I think if we think a little bit from a historical lens about some of what you've already discussed, Poria, there is a reality as to how local government has evolved over time. The literature speaks widely about the role of the new public management paradigm of governance that has shaped the management of local governments over the last several decades, which is really a repurposed form of business practice that was designed more to optimize service delivery than anything that might be of deeper purpose from a municipal perspective. And as an outcome of that paradigm of management, we see local governments that are, is there an issue? Can you not hear me? Sorry, I'm just
yes, we are
observing.
asking our colleagues to increase the volume a little bit.
Okay, thank you. If I need to speak louder, please let me know.
So that we could adjust the level of So.
Excellent. Okay, so yeah, essentially decades of this paradigm of management have resulted in local governments where we see siloed structures of functioning with departments and teams, an environment where issues are compartmentalized and addressed individually. Organizations that tend to be risk adverse when it comes to engaging with external actors with limited openness and transparency, leveraging processes and structures that tend to be relatively inflexible and rigid, and as well, organizational practices that tend to be reactive and more responsive to change once impacts are actually felt. What we see is an emergent new purpose of government. It looks in general terms something like governments being interested in a greater purpose, something like enabling community well-being and resilience, creating the possibility of flourishing. And while we see this evolution in the purpose of government, the challenge becomes how to enable this to happen, given that the model of operation, the governance and underlying structures have been designed in a manner that is really not well aligned with the emergent purpose. And so there is this field of innovation that you've spoken to, Poria, that we'll speak about today, that is really designed to fill this gap and enable the transition to this new purpose. So I'd like to quickly introduce the iceberg model, typically used as part of applying systems thinking to different forms of problem solving. I'm just noticing that what's appearing on my screen is no longer what I'm projecting. Can you still see my slides or no?
Yes, we can see your slides.
Okay, excellent. So what I want to say quickly in making sense of the iceberg model, I don't want to make this a technical conversation. The iceberg model is really designed to exhibit leverage theory. What it says is that usually we respond to what is visible and more concrete and apparent at the top, but really in terms of making change, the greatest potential, the highest leverage points lie at the very bottom of the iceberg. And at those levels as well, making change is much more difficult. And we can liken or use the iceberg model to help understand or make sense of our sustainability and climate challenge. So, typically what we see is most complex systemic issues that relate to sustainability matters tend to be addressed at lower level policy development and planning, within lower level policy development and planning practices or processes, and through various actions and point projects that are undertaken. Truthfully, engaging with the real challenges and resolving the complexity relies going to the bottom of the iceberg and dealing with the deeply rooted system structures and elements that limit our progress from being incremental or to being rather incremental rather than transformative. And so, we look at the next layer at the very bottom, that being the mindsets of leaders. And I think there's good evidence to suggest that we see leaders beginning to understand the world in more complex terms. Systems thinking has become more popular, and there's good indication that the relevance and utility of systems thinking is being embraced and understood. The challenge, though, becomes the next layer up at the level of strategic management practices and governance structures of the organization, where typically there's a great deal of complexity in applying or making sense of systems theory within core strategic management functions, though to this stage, there has been a lack of evidence-based solutions to support the transformation of strategic management practices and leaders in doing so. And certainly in our experience and from what we've seen, applying systems thinking to the core strategic management practices of an organization is not as simple as just figuring it out as we go. So I want to speak a little bit to this field of systemic management innovations that you touched on, Poria, and in particular, a bit of the history. So it's been over a decade now that I have, with my colleagues, been developing a global community of practice made up of researchers, academics, and most importantly, innovators who have been interested in developing what is an emerging field of disruptive knowledge, methods, and tools that are really designed to recast management for the 21st century. And through this community of practice, many systemic management innovations have emerged globally. So I just want to take a moment to speak to what's on the slide here in sharing what distinguishes a systemic management innovation from any other form of innovation. So typically what a systemic management innovation does is it applies systems theory to recast how strategic management is understood. It also provides the detailed guidance and discipline that's needed to effectively adapt management practices within an organizational context. Typically, systemic management innovations respect science and ethics-based thresholds, and we'll unpack that through an example. And as well, they're more integrated, or they lead to more integrative, collective, and adaptive practices. Ultimately, systemic management innovations use a systems lens to enable leaders to manage in a more holistic and rigorous way, and ultimately enable them to overcome complexity rather than ignoring it or overstepping it, as is often the case in how we manage today. And what I'd like to say is that many of these innovations have now been tested and refined for years, and in some cases more than a decade, and are truly ready to be scaled in these arenas and in local governments where they're very much needed. So let's speak briefly to an example. I hope many of you are aware of the concept of thresholds. Simply, we are talking about sort of the limits of planetary or ecological systems, or the minimum requirements that we have for human well-being that are defined by the natural and social sciences, as well as the best ethical frameworks that we have. Thresholds are generally inarguable, or rather concrete, specific, and defensible in how they are defined. From the perspective of systems theory, what we understand is that we need to respect these limits or thresholds in order to ensure the viability of a system. What you see on the slide here is a visual of the Sustainable Development Goals and the donut economics model. Both of these innovations represent a support, or represent supporting the transition from incrementally doing less harm towards respecting science and ethics-based thresholds that define sustainability. Both frameworks, though, are designed in a rather high-level way. They provide something of a global or perhaps a national perspective on the sorts of goals that we need to achieve. And in our experience, when local governments attempt to apply these frameworks or models, they essentially fail, in that there's an incredible amount of complexity that goes into credibly, meaningfully, authentically translating what are global level goals down to a local and operational level. And when left to their own devices, typically what happens is local governments end up reverting to what are incremental indicators, metrics, and targets that essentially do not align with the whole idea of thresholds. So while these frameworks are adopted in principle, when organizations tend to apply them, they fail to apply them, diminishing or dismissing the value of them in the first place. So moving from that, I'd like to share a little bit from our perspective of systemic management innovations. So one particular systemic management innovation is called context-based sustainability. So this is an open source, triple bottom line integrated accounting methodology for measuring, managing, and assessing the reporting and the performance of organizations relative to thresholds. So my colleague, Dr. Mark McElroy, who is a management accounting expert, who has been in the field for more than 30 years, worked directly with Donella Meadows, one of the foremost and leading thinkers who has popularized systems theory. They worked together for over a decade to develop context-based sustainability as a theory. Context-based sustainability essentially navigates this gap between what is a principled idea, a systemic way of thinking about things, down to how it needs to be applied in practice in order to be effectively utilized. Rather than how most sustainability issues are typically addressed, in a separate siloed way, but within a climate sustainability or equity office or through a planning process. The design of the systemic management innovation is that it is fully integrated. It works directly with the management practices of the organization in a manner that is consistent with how leaders would understand management. The difference being that the practices themselves are designed to be holistic and rigorous and ultimately lead to better practice, fundamentally better practice in every way, not just limited to sustainability outcomes, of course. I wanted to touch on a further point on this example, that being in relationship to the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development. They themselves recognized the limited impact that the SDGs have been having with organizations and the struggle organizations have had applying them. They solicited my colleagues who developed context-based sustainability, have been innovating in this space for some time, to develop with them a pilot and ultimately the Sustainable Development Performance Indicators, which are designed essentially to help organizations to apply the SDGs in practice. The SDPIs, along with what you see on the right-hand side, which is another similar innovation developed by my colleagues called the Multi-Capital Scorecard, are both examples of systemic management innovations that, again, help organizations to overcome the complexity involved in making sense of systems theory at a strategic management level. I'd like to quickly touch on the partnership that we've been working on. So we've been deeply engaged with ICLEI, the ICLEI World Secretariat, through Poria and his colleagues for a few years now, and our interest has been to help mobilize these systemic management innovations to bring understanding, awareness, and opportunities for testing their application in practice within local governments in different contexts, and to learn how they can best be utilized so that we can share that knowledge globally. As part of that process, we've created Municipalities Adapting in Response to Complexity, which is a growing global learning and innovation partnership that's been supported by dozens of municipalities, innovators, NGOs, as well as academics and funders. As part of MARC, our ambition is to test a programmatic approach, which Poria mentioned we have developed and tested. We refer to it as Enterprise Evolution. Enterprise Evolution is essentially a dialogically based program intended for organizational leaders. Its design is such that it helps organizations to grapple with the complexity of adopting SMIs, or systemic management innovations, as part of adapting strategic management practices. So the program is really intended to help leaders understand how to methodically go about applying multiple systemic management innovations in practice, recognizing that individual systemic management innovations only have limited value. It's only when we transform the entire system of management that we get the full benefit of each SMI, or systemic management innovation. So to expand on that a little bit more, the program is somewhat unique in its design, in that it is specifically oriented to support leaders through the process of selecting a combination of systemic management innovations that specifically matches their challenges, needs, and priorities. There's a clear understanding that the trajectory of this path is very much a long transition made up of many transformative or transformational programs. And the idea is that the program is delivered as one iteration, one round of transformational change. So in each round, there would be any number of systemic management innovations that would be applied in combination. The approach to delivering the program is highly collaborative. So unlike a traditional management consulting project, it is staff, it is the administrators who develop the content. The experts, the facilitators, work side by side with them to ensure they have adequate support and expertise to ensure they are successful in how they apply them. But ultimately, the goal is that through that practice, that opportunity to use the tools and methods practically and directly with support, that learning happens and that the individuals involved develop the capabilities that they need in order to continue applying the innovations independently and beyond the scope of the initial experiment, test, or application through which the SMIs are adopted. I'll just pause for a moment before I close to offer a little bit more insight, just to say that this partnership is now growing. We've had the opportunity to test this with multiple municipalities the results have been quite exceptional in that we are seeing how applying these innovations in practice leads to many of these sort of system structures, the underlying aspects of governance and management that tend to hold back progress and keep sort of movement to increments and enable deeper change. So through some of our research and our ongoing work, our goal is now to expand the partnership, to build on the learning that we have done to this point. So we're very much interested in working with others, bringing new partners to the table. And ultimately, we would love to hear from you. Of course, Poria and ICLEI being present would be the best conduits to have conversations and to learn more about the Enterprise Evolution Program, as well as the MARC partnership through which we are bringing the program out into the world. On that note, I just want to say a very big thank you for the opportunity to speak a little bit about this innovation and the program, as well as the MARC partnership. And yeah, I look forward to connecting with some of you following the session and through Poria and ICLEI. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Randy. Can you hear me? Yeah, well, because I don't know. Is my voice coming through? Okay, that's great. Now it works. Yeah, because I was like switching on and off to see it's like there's difference. There was no, but now there is. No, thank you so much, Randy. Really appreciate what you share here, and I think obviously what Randy did here, he tried to tailor it to a little bit of a generic messaging for the audience, knowing that we have different types of audience at COP, but also listening to the recording later. But there's a lot of substance under that, because this whole systemic management, innovation, and enterprise evolution is not a tool. It's a toolkit. It's an approach that includes a lot of different methods, and from multi-capital scorecard to different SMI profiles. But what is really interesting that I would like to hear from Masamba, knowing that Masamba, you have started and initiated something very interesting, that is systemic innovation process, and you're delivering that through a series of continuous workshops that they are building upon each other, and that's the whole notion of evolution and experimentation, and obviously. Nature of Global Innovation Hub is a collaborative space and perspective to see which one really resonate with cities and city leaders and citizens and different actors. Ask, to what extent what Randy mentioned resonated with the systemic innovation workshops that you are running, and where do you see this enterprise evolution and this approach to capacitate local leaders can help deliver the broader objectives that you have in mind in terms of systemic innovation process, and how this approach can potentially of human needs in the context of polycrisis we are facing today. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Poria. Good morning to all of you. My name is Masamba Choi. I'm the project executive of the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, and very pleased to have you all here. Thank you, Poria, for organizing this very important session. Indeed, there are a lot of connection between this systemic management innovation and the systemic innovation process that the Global Innovation Hub is running. And we are looking forward to build the bridge between the Global Innovation Hub and this initiative of Randy. Probably after COP, it will be very good to have some conference call and go more in depth on how we can explore possibility of collaboration. So if you want to address the challenge of climate and sustainability, first, innovation is a very important part of the toolbox. I always say that we did not shift from horse to car by taxing the horses. Policy instruments are very important, but they are not enough. Carbon market is an important tool, but unless we are able to innovate and develop the alternative solution that people can use to change their lifestyle, to change their consumption, unless we are able to come up with this solution, and unless we are able to invest and finance the upscale deployment of this solution, nothing will happen. That's absolutely clear. So innovation is critical. But if you want to innovate for climate and sustainability, we have to do, number one, the right thing, and number two, we have to do it rightly. Doing the right thing is somehow linked to the mindset Randy was mentioning. And for us, it is encapsulated around three core concepts: caring, sharing, and daring. For innovation to serve climate and sustainability, it should genuinely care for the needs and the well-being of both the many people and the planet. We have to come also with this mindset of sharing, of knowledge, of experience, sharing solution, and be more, let's say, solution provider oriented. It's not about solving my own problem, but it's about how can I develop a solution others can also use. And finally, the daring part. If you are not able to set goal and target based on what is needed and not based on our perception of what is possible, we will not be able to have the transformative change that are needed, because this is precisely the gap between what is needed and what is currently possible that will be the driver of innovation. Now, on doing the things rightly, this is where systemic innovation will play a very important role. As you mentioned at the beginning, we are living in a very complex world that is characterized by volatility. Things are changing very quickly, uncertainty, and also interconnection across issues, as well as ambiguity. And this type of challenge, you cannot address them if you do not have a systemic approach for innovation. What does it mean concretely? It means that you need to have a holistic approach because the issues are interlinked. You cannot just focus on climate because then your solution can have a ripple effect negative on biodiversity. So you need to see all the different SDGs holistically. And one important aspect is the response need to be integrative, because it's not just about developing innovative technology, but the right response is a combination of innovative technology, but also innovative policy instrument, innovative business model, innovative cooperative approach, innovative product from the culture and creative industry, if we want to develop and deploy at scale. One of the main challenges that we are facing currently is that you can have a good innovative technology, but then you have a bottleneck somewhere else. For example, if I take the case of green hydrogen, some of the countries that have the highest potential include Namibia. But the problem is in Namibia, the interest rate is more than 15%. So it means, and all these innovative technologies that are clean have a very high upfront capital. So if you have such a type of interest rate, it's almost impossible to have this type of project implemented on the ground. So it means that you need innovative financial instruments that need to be connected to this innovative technology solution to make it happen. In some other instance, it's about adoption. You can come up with a good product that is good for the futures that we would like to build, but the population do not like it. They don't want to adopt it. And this is why products from the cultural and creative industry are important, as well also the role of faith to facilitate the change of mindset and lifestyle. Where I would like to insist so that, you know, I think it's on top of having alignment on many aspects of what Randy presented, there's a lot of complementarity. So the performance management system that he has described is very powerful in the sense that it is holistic. But I see one limitation. It is focusing on the constraint. And I think it's very important when we are talking about sustainability or regeneration to be mindful of the different role of the different component. The needs, the social aspect, should be the purpose. The economical element should be considered as means. And finally, all the elements related to ecology, the planetary boundaries that he was mentioning, should be considered as constraint. They are not the purpose. We are not focusing on how do we decarbonize the industry. Our focus is on how do we satisfy the needs of the many people. So it should be one performance indicator and one of the most important performance indicator. How can we deliver flourishing life to the many people? Now, all the other indicators are constraint. They are important to follow, but we need to be mindful that it's not the purpose. The purpose is first to provide flourishing life to the many people. And it's why I think the need-based approach that we are promoting at the Global Innovation Hub, combined with the systemic management innovation that Randy is proposing, could be a very powerful tool.
Much appreciated, Musamba. Like always, you articulate really, really nicely, and I'm impressed how you came from local level and go back. And I really like the analogy that you use in terms of cost centers, means, and the ends. And I cannot agree more with you. Economic development, we overused our cost centers, and the invoices are now coming back at us, right? Which makes really hard social needs to a level that we are hoping to, and that's exactly what is impacting the local level, changing the realities, and increasing the complexities. And then how to deliver on this in a very harmonized way, ensuring that economic development is there, but at the same time we are ensuring that we are not overusing ecological services and systems, but at the end, the final end is to address those needs. It's quite crucial, and systemic management innovation can hopefully and should in practice deliver. Like how probably we do not have a blueprint for anything. Obviously, this should be even more tested. This should be applied. The knowledge would be sort of generated. And again, there is no one fit solution for all challenges. And also, like these sustainability and targets, if we take sustainability, I really like sustainability, using more sustainability as opposed to merely climate change, because if you're talking about sustainability, you're talking about, you're also talking about economic development, but more importantly about social aspects of life. But how this can, and we know that this is moving target, and how systemic management innovation can cater to what you said is quite crucial. Randy to share some feedback based on what actually Musamba said, to what extent you think what Musamba reflected in a meta level, knowing that the aim of work at the Global Innovation Hub is at the city and local level. So knowing that, Randy, you are also working with cities in Canada, what are your thoughts? What are your immediate thoughts that sort of you would like to share based on Musamba's contribution?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Poria and Musamba. It was a pleasure to hear you speak. I think my immediate reaction is that there is not even a hair that is misaligned in our interpretations and understandings. I mean, the way that you articulated the importance of human well-being as being the purpose, the environmental limitations or ecological limitations as being the constraints, the idea of human flourishing, these are all central tenets. And if anything, you know, it just makes me feel disappointed that in the short time we have to cover a lot of ground. Sometimes it becomes difficult to be entirely accurate and explicit about some of these distinctions that are so fundamentally critical to how we understand things and how they need to be in order to be effective in practice. But your interpretations for me are spot on, and I think we're very much aligned. The nature of the systemic management innovations that we develop align with this sort of premise of being human-centered and ultimately the idea of living within constraints is to the end of supporting the well-being of individuals.
Wonderful, thank you, Randy. This is helpful to see the synergies, and as somebody said, I think we need to have a follow-up conversation to go through details and see what actually the systemic management, innovation, and enterprise evolution can offer to the broader sort of systemic innovation workshop and its process. David, we know that you've been working on the systemic management innovation with Randy, Manuel, Tim. And also you're coming from a co-creation background. And we understand that when it comes to innovation and experimentation with all the stakeholders, co-creation takes a center stage. So I would like to hear from you what are sort of your immediate reflections to all this conversation, and what do you think we need on top of what has been already discussed? Thank you.
Thank you, Poria. Thank you also to Masamba and Randy for those really insightful and also really inspiring contributions as well. I think there's a couple of things before I get to like 3 key points in response to Poria's question. So firstly, I think this idea of flexible and proactive in governance is really challenging, and I think it's underestimated, that combination. But to act in advance of something and to have the flexibility to kind of recalibrate according to these dynamic challenges is really difficult for governance to adapt to. And I think that ties into this, the idea of overcoming complexity was something that made me think a bit, because to me that sounds like we're trying to reduce it, and simplify it, which I think is one of the key contributions of the systemic management innovation approach, which is that you're not trying to reduce it, which is the natural instinct, right? We walk through our environment and we want to reduce things into an understandable context. And I think that systemic management innovation has this holistic approach to kind of upscale what we're doing in governance, to, instead of overcoming complexity or reducing it, to rather engage with it actively and in a sustained manner. And I think that that's really a unique contribution from that. I also really like these points of sharing, caring, and daring. And hopefully, I think that ties in well to what I have as my 3 points. So as Poria said, I have a background in co-creation processes. And I think for me, there's something that's quite alarming, which is that in the past, we've seen these engagement processes treated as a tick box, right? Like a consultation process. And co-creation is meant to answer that and respond to that problem. But I'm worried at this stage that it's at risk of becoming another tick box in some ways. And that we see co-creation from like the moral or ethical perspective, that we have to ask people their opinions and to engage because they live out the repercussions of the decisions we make. But there's, I think, still a lack of recognition for the mutual benefit that co-creation can provide. So for example, in the Capacities Day event that I was fortunate enough to be at yesterday, there was a panelist from an Indian city, and he actually shared that the majority of their solutions that work in the long term have come out of really messy co-creation processes. And I think that for me, this was a really interesting insight. And I think that co-creation really needs to be set in a shared vision. So it means bringing people together and into the process very early on. Because without this guiding vision, it threatens to become this tick box process. So that would be one idea that I think that the systemic management innovation approach can really engage with. The next aspect is this idea of innovation in the public sector. And I've been fortunate through my research to also engage with a lot of public sector officials across Australian cities and South African cities. And I really have a sense that there's a lot of promise in the public sector and a lot of ambition, actually. And I think that it's really stifled by existing structures, and that ties into this idea of flexibility as well, and experimentation. And so there's a lot of pressure to not fail in the public sector, right? And that's natural because the decisions that are being made have real repercussions on people's lives. So there is a sense of responsibility there. However, we need to change, as Masamba was alluding to as well, how we measure success. And this needs to change to foster experimentation rather than to inhibit experimentation. And I think that this means that we need to incorporate feedback loops to learn from failures, because this is the only way that we can move from best practices into next practices through these processes of reflection, which can unlock this public sector innovation that we're striving towards. Another aspect is really consciously building across silos in the public sector and being able to work across different departments, especially when we look at leveraging technology. This is a critical aspect because technology is only as good as the process through which it's applied. So we need this really holistic policy approach to enable it to live up to its game-changing potential that it's heralded to have. And if I can end, the last point is I see a disconnect between the formal governance structures and what's happening on the ground. So through engaging with communities, for example, in South Africa, I've seen incredible initiatives that are taking place on the ground that lack the platform to be scaled, although they could have a really significant impact on the status quo. And I think that there's not enough of this engaging with local complexity to recognize them. And that's what it means to me to engage with local complexity. It's to identify these resources and these capacities that already exist on the ground. And there's amazing people who are filling this gap currently, intermediaries who often work against their institutional logics to support these initiatives. And I think that they're really heroes in terms of building these capacities, but they're also unsung heroes. So my other point would be that within the systemic management innovation, there needs to be space to recognize this middle space that happens and the essential actors that are within it that aren't currently recognized. And I see that as a key capacity to build this capacity to engage with local complexity. That's an untouched resource that I would really like to see exploited, although I hate the word exploited, more in the future. Thank you, Poria. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you so much, David. You really glued the whole two conversation together very nicely. I really appreciate that. And I don't think I have anything to add to that, but one word you mentioned, capacities. And guess what? Yesterday, we were co-leading capacities, the capacity building hub dedicated to cities, that's the Cities Day. And in the high-level closing dialogue, we had a wonderful panelist that I didn't have the pleasure of meeting them before, but she was genuinely touched me with their contribution. The reason being, it was very personable and sharing the reality as a local leader. And for that, I was really impressed and asked them to join us today. Their luggage was not delivered, so they needed to go to the airport, and they couldn't make to the panel. But guess what? She's here. Saida Melina Rodriguez Gomez, the Secretary of Sustainable Development of Yucatan from Mexico. Please join us on the panel. Please join me giving a round of applause. Thank you so much, Saida. I really appreciate for taking time and joining us here. I oftentimes, I know quite a lot of local leaders because of the work that we do through our network. But Saida, you really impressed me and impressed the audience yesterday. And obviously, the work that you are doing at the local level is dealing with realities, right? If you're talking the talks, you're walking the walk. So I just want to recap quickly what has happened here. Our colleague Randy Satt from Canada, they unpacked a little bit the systemic management innovation, the work that we've been doing for over 2 years together, helping local leaders that they are very busy. They don't have a lot of capacity to really look into new innovative tools and approaches, but the landscape they are navigating is not a very stable landscape. A lot of uncertainties, a lot of things are changing, pandemic hits, norms changes, digitalization, poverty. So all of this, we need to find new approaches to governance. We need to change our practices. But when it comes to changing practice in governance, it's not easy because oftentimes, even if you are an expert in governance and knowledge is outdated, gets outdated quite quickly. So how we can, knowing that our local leaders are at the forefront of decision making for the communities, and yet they are dealing with a hot potato, how we can really help them to navigate this whole thing, how we can support them. And that's where the role of international organization and UN agencies come into play. And Musamba, my colleague, is the executive officer of UNFCCC Global Innovation Hub, a genuinely innovative a sort of body even within the UN structure. And what Musamba and yes, and what they are doing is very interesting. Within the UN are looking at the cities and local level and trying to sort of deliver innovation and support cities through a systemic innovation process, delivered through a series of systemic innovation workshops. And the focus is on human needs, something that like we discussed yesterday a little bit with the other panelists. So there was a lot said here, but obviously I would like to yield the floor back a little bit to Musamba to sort of recap a little bit for you, and then we would like to then hear from my colleague Kesha, and then come to you to understand to what extent it resonates with you, knowing that you just joined. I don't want to put you on the spot immediately. But Musamba, I would like you to share some of your thoughts for Saida, and knowing that she is dealing with all these complexities in her day-to-day decision-making processes in their estate. Over to you.
Thank you. Maybe just to summarize, because of the constraint of time, I will come back on these three core values that the Global Innovation Hub has, and around which we are articulating most of our action: caring, sharing, and daring. So we consider that if we want innovation to serve climate and sustainability, it has to genuinely care for the needs and the well-being of the many people and the planet. And then the sharing part, we have to share knowledge, and this is why we are supporting open source. We should not hide knowledge behind paywall, and we are supporting also sharing experience and a mindset of a solution provider. It's not about a city or a nation or a corporate addressing its own problem. It's more about developing solutions others can also use. And finally, moonshot way of thinking, the daring part. It's not about setting goal and target based on our understanding of what is possible, but more based on what is needed. And the gap between what is needed and what is possible is what will drive innovation. And we focus on cities because of our understanding that cities are caring, they care about their citizens, and they are sharing. We have a lot of cities that are solution provider, and they are daring, much more ambitious than their national government.
Thank you. And yes, daring is a keyword for ICLEI as well. We are running daring cities, right? So that is obviously a very keyword for us. Thanks, Musamba, for that. Kesha, we know that you're dealing with a lot of cities in South Asia Secretariat. So before going to Latin America and South America, to be more precise, I would like to hear from you to what extent, maybe 2 to 3 minutes for the sake of interest of time. To what extent do you think the systemic management innovation can cater to the needs of local leadership, knowing that the structure of governance is a little bit different in that region? Thank you for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. First of all, thanks to Global Innovation Hub for organizing such a wonderful pavilion. This is very much needed, especially we are in the era of climate emergency. As we have seen, we are not having climate change, but we are in the climate boiling stage, as per the United Nations Secretary General. And I must say that we need to tackle this climate emergency. We need the transformative actions, not in terms of just the technology, but also in terms of thinking and the policy, and then also systematic approach. And we need basically whole of society approach, whole of city approach, where we not think of a particular urban system in a isolated manner, but we look at the whole city in an integrated and a one single entity form. So I just want to like to mention about some of the innovative activity that has been taken up in South Asian context. For example, there have been something called service level benchmark for not just the service efficiency, but also the human needs. How much people have been engaged in the political decision-making process, and also defining those sustainability indicators. So there have been a lot of innovation, and then along with this service level benchmark, there have been also cities basically promoted something called SmartNet, where basically all the innovation that is happening at the local level, it has been repository and created as a SmartNet hub, where even the private sector, the local entrepreneurs, the local private sector society, they're all contributing to this SmartNet and creating a depository of knowledge and resources, which is a very important tool for everybody to have it. Another thing I want to mention about the special purpose vehicle, we are preparing more than 100 smart cities in India, and all the smart cities have their special purpose vehicle, which is a basically separate entity, and one of the core agenda for that entity is innovation. How to bring innovation and technological innovation into the smart cities that they're developing. So that is considering the human needs. Of course, that is the main thing. So yeah, so all of these innovations are there. What I believe is the importance of sharing between cities is more important, because one innovative action has been taken in certain part of city. It has to be shared. It has to be well informed to other cities, so they do not create the similar mistake. Often the costly mistakes. So they can learn from each other and leverage from other people's experience. That is more important. So I would say that is more important, and ICLEI has been doing a lot of good work and with our partners and solution providers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kesha. In short amount of time, you shared a lot, and I think like you really unpacked that caring and sharing and daring in some examples from your region. Really appreciate that. But one thing that I really want to pick from your contribution was like transformation also in thinking, and that is that mindset shift or moonshot thinking in Musamba's terms that is certainly needed, and that is needed for not only our local leaders, but also our citizens and businesses and other actors within jurisdictions. So we are all talking about these things in theoretic or abstract terms and designing some tools, but at the end of the day, a tool can be good as much as it can be, but then local realities. And local realities are key drivers, and I'm sure, like based on the conversation with many local leaders, sometimes they find value in many of these, but they don't find them applicable in their context. So, Saida, thank you again for being with us this morning. But would like to understand from your perspective, knowing that based on what we shared initially, that like the increasing complexity is making it challenging to govern the society, the community, the cities in the way that we were doing. And at the same time, we want to sort of provide a well-being and flourishing life for people, and not only addressing the challenges, but it's becoming increasingly challenging to address all of that. So how do you think international organizations and these methods and approaches should support local leaders that are dealing with all the real challenges on a daily, perhaps hourly basis in their decision makings? How Global Innovation Hub, knowledge and evidence-based approaches, knowledge-sharing partners, innovation community, where Randy, for example, coming from, or a global network of cities such as ICLEI can really support local leaders to ensure that they have the right tools in hand to govern. So thank you for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Pura. It's a pleasure to be here just for a few minutes, but I would say, like, if I had the opportunity to write a letter to Santa right now, to our panelists, I would say that for local, not only local leaders, for local realities. I mean, what happens in local realities, especially in America, in the Caribbean, in Mexico especially, is that we are lack of politician leadership. That's what happened. The leaders are not sensitive about the importance of changing their mindset. this is the big challenge that we have right now. So we got a few champs, very few, but we have many other politicians that what happened is it is like a candlelight. I mean, it's gone in 3 years that we changed local leaders. The light is gone, and that's it. All the path that we are started going down. So what, if I could ask something, I would say we have to work in sensitive leaderships. Local leader politicians, they need to prioritize this issue and to know that they have the support of academic, of UN, and a lot of people who have been work about how to doing things. There is a path set. Just need this importance mindset changing that we need to do in a local leadership. And if it's happened, if this thing really get through, I think we are already set to do it faster, to really daring cities and deliver through that mission very fast, because things are happening and society is sensitive. Some people is sensitive, some academics are sensitive, some private sector are sensitive. So we just need to have this politic ambition set, and that's it. I mean, let's light up the lights inside of the cities in Mexico, I think.
Thank you so much for this contribution. I think it's really hard for us to say it about politicians, but when a politician says that, you know, like we need more political ambitions, then things are different. And I think like I myself was making a big mistake a few years ago. I thought that everything needs to be systems based. And then I realized that having a systemic approach is as good as a champion-based approach. So we need some champions to promote that systemic approach. So these two needs to be combined. And obviously, like having a champion like you in Mexico obviously is an advantage for your region, but also an example for other local governments within your region, but also globally. So with that, I would like to yield the floor back to Randy for a 1 minute final closing remarks, knowing that we are at a time. Randy, over to you.
No, thanks very much, Portia. I think what strikes me in hearing everyone speak and the various contributions is just that I think when we think about our ambition and where we need to get, often is the case we rely on the exceptional individuals that exist within organizations by virtue of their own ingenuity to come up with the solutions, the ideas, the things that can be transformed. And I think the fundamental change that needs to happen is that the nature of our organizations, how they're designed, what they reward, what they breed, train, promote, perpetuate, is the kind of thinking, the kind of practice, the kind of ways of collaborating and working with others that ultimately lead to these outcomes naturally, and not because one exceptional individual in a department happened to think in a disruptive manner and has done their own personal development and happens to be sensitive in a way that others aren't. And I think that's the opportunity that's here, is really reconceiving of how we can design and develop organizations and leaders within them to allow for these sorts of outcomes to become a natural occurrence and something that happens reliably by virtue of how local governments function. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Randy. Thanks to all the panelists. Please join me to giving a round of applause to all our panelists. Really appreciate that. And with that, we come to the end of this conversation, but not obviously to the end of this work. It's just a start. Thank you.
Thank you, Puria. Thank you. So we'll continue our discussion on the roles of cities in the next session. May I request our next moderator, Georgia Rambelli, who's director with UTM, GCOM, to moderate this session, and other panelists who are part of this session to come up on the podium. Georgia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Nitin. And we are a little bit late, so we're going to start immediately. So I want to start by wishing you all good morning, distinguished delegates and colleagues. We are in a cozy room, but hopefully more and more colleagues